So let's talk about systems. In my work as a director in diversity and inclusion and a graduate student at Wake Forest University, I'm charged with understanding systems. I assess how they work and how we might reimagine systems to create greater access and justice for all. And as a result, I tend to think in systems, considering how my experience, my organization and arrangement of things might prevent unintended consequences or produce great outcomes. So like eating kale and drinking smoothies in the morning so I'm not cranky at work. You see, systems have huge implications because the creative linkages and interactions between things produce certain outcomes. When it comes to the human experience, systems we create determine what histories, what people, what stories are elevated and validated, or others that are completely erased from our consciousness. So I'm here today because I argue that our humanity is contingent upon our understanding of the systemic realities impacting our relationships. And while I got this from my work, my sister is who taught me most about it. You see, she and I are about 8 years apart, and as her little brother, I deeply admire her. She's dynamic and invested in her community, in part because she loves to celebrate people. When someone's getting married, having a birthday, or expecting, they call her. Her compassion and creativity in those moments is what makes her remarkable. When she plans an event, she'll sit and listen to her client's story, and almost instantly, people open up about their desires, their hopes, their favorite colors and TV shows. And by the end of it, complete strangers feel like family. Following those moments of connection, she sources her magic and starts to serve as a designer, a balloon artist, engaging her network of creatives to make her vision, informed from the stories of others, into a reality. She's absolutely amazing to watch. And to be honest, as her little brother, I just sit there in awe. And many of my interests and love of people completely are inspired from her. But for the longest time, I forgot about this. You see, when we were younger, my sister was arrested for shoplifting, and she became a convicted felon and was immediately relegated to second-class citizenship. What I know now is that when that happens, you get trapped in a vicious cycle of discrimination. You're restricted from professional licenses, public services and benefits, student loans, voting, jury duty, and even some employment. And once that happened to my sister, that's really all that I could see, was a person unable to get and keep a job, someone living in shoddy houses and relying on a hustle to make ends meet. I thought of us as existing in two completely different worlds. Me in pursuit of higher education and success, she just trying to make it. One day she calls me after a long day of work, and she was very upset. What she said was that her lights had been cut off and that she was talking to me by candlelight. Unfortunately, her 2 kids had been dropped off at their grandparents, and they were all set for school, but she was really frustrated and just hurt. Mostly concerned about making sure the kids had what they needed. And just normally she would make a way out of no way, but she really wasn't sure how she was going to get out of this one. She just didn't have the strength or the money. I listened silently and replied coldly, and said, I'm sorry. You're going to have to figure this out on your own. I'm not going to give you any money. She paused and she said, Matt, it's not about the money. I just need you to be with me. My heart sank deep into the pit of my stomach. And I couldn't help but think of how much of a disappointment I must be to her. You see, I committed the most egregious crime, the failure to recognize her humanity and exercise compassion when she needed it most. That was the beginning of a shift for me. And for the past year, I've focused my graduate research agenda on examining the ways Black women, including trans women, are disadvantaged through systemic and institutional violence. What I have learned is that I had most often come to view my sister through the lens of a criminal justice system that privileges men over women, that protects white people while vilifying people of color, supports wealth over culpability, and legitimates certain forms of sexuality and denies others. And this system is reinforced in various ways when you look and see what stories and how they're told in the media, what policies are passed and who they protect, and who we deem worthy of quality health care, education, food, and financial investment. You see, the sad truth is that recognition in this system gives you an unearned position of power that allows you to reap benefits while those with experiences outside of its bounds are reduced to objects of suspicion or surveillance. So while I may have some privilege as a man in this system, my sister was completely unprotected. And yet my sisters are still fighting. In 2015, I met Alicia Garza and Opal Tometi, co-creators of Black Lives Matter, along with Patrisse Cullors. They were speaking at a conference. Their leadership, along with a set of international organizers, predominantly women, offer empowerment through resistance to this current system. Their efforts are radically inclusive as they seek to honor the intersections of Black racial identity with gender, sexuality, immigrant status, social class, and ability to challenge abuses under the law. Through actions under the banners of Say Her Name and Trans Liberation Tuesday and Black Narratives Matter, they've been able to elevate the reprehensible violence against Black women. Violences such as, in the case of Marissa Alexander, a 31-year-old Black Florida mother who was sentenced to 20 years in prison for firing a shot in the air as an act of self-defense against a boyfriend who repeatedly beat her and threatened her life. And in that same year, in the same state, with the same prosecutor, George Zimmerman, a white Hispanic man, was acquitted of killing an unarmed 17-year-old teen named Trayvon Martin. Alexander's case sparked outrage as people protested against the unequal application of the Stand Your Ground law. You see, in Alexander's case, she was sentenced to jail, but George Zimmerman walks free. There's also Islan Nettles, a 20-year-old who was out with friends in New York City one night when a group of young men approached her. They find out that she was a transgender woman and then start taunting and maliciously beating her to death right in front of a police precinct in Harlem, New York. And what's interesting is that in a law enforcement system where 1 in 3 trans women report being racially profiled by police, Ms. Nettles' hyper-surveillance only reinforces the inhumanity of a system that professes to serve and protect. So while police were always watching, when she needed them to view her most, she was simply less than human. And these systemic realities point back to centuries of exclusionary politics where Black women were rendered defenseless against any form of violence with no protection under the law. And yet, despite these systemic realities, Black Lives Matter is a feminist force mobilizing, fighting, and advocating for the existence of Black women. Black women soldier on, driving political action as the largest voting bloc in the electoral process. They blossom as one of the most highly educated contingencies in higher education. And they lead in our communities as pastors, educators, mothers, aunts, entrepreneurs, executives, and public servants. By centering the lived experiences of Black women, we uncover important truths about our criminal justice system that require urgent action from all of us. You see, when some of our lives are rendered less than human, it becomes an option for us all. When some of our lives are rendered less than human, it becomes an option for us all. And so our greatest resistance to this system is love. So when politics seeks to polarize us, we must act in love. When public officials seek to criminalize adolescent behavior, we must act in love. When people seek to mock and hide people with disabilities in the shadows, we must act in love. When any system seeks to divide us, we must act in love. I remember when I came out to my sister 2 years ago, this week. She was the last person that was closest to me that I told. Fear and shame kept me from her. The inevitable outcomes of a dysfunctional system. I was home for her baptism, and I remember waking up that morning in tears. Crying uncontrollably, I was overwhelmed, stressed because I was hiding an essential part of my identity. I was crumbling because of my lack of humility. She, on the other hand, was thriving. Family had traveled from all over to see her. Friends filled the church, overjoyed by her profession of faith. I remember when she took her plunge into the water, she with tears in her eyes of happiness, me with mixed emotions. And when she rose, the church erupted with applause. It was a beautiful moment of affirmation and love. Following the service, we went to her home. Friends and family were in and out with gifts and hugs, and I asked her to come outside, and we sat in 2 rocking chairs on her porch. And I could barely muster up the strength, with tears in my eyes, as I said, "I'm gay." And she said, "Okay." Matt, you almost killed yourself worrying about this. I love you. Dismantling systems of injustice, and that keep us from connecting with one another starts with that. I love you. It's about time for us to move closer to one another and start learning about the experiences of others, starting to advocate for one another, for legislative change that dismantles divisive systems. In the words of acclaimed activist Assata Shakur, and a chant that's often shared at Black Lives Matter events, it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and respect each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Thank you.